Welcome back to Southeast Asia Radio. This week, Jaffet is overseas and Lauren is under the weather. So welcome to the first ever intern edition of Southeast Asia Radio. I'm Gemma King, one of the Southeast Asia program interns.
I'm so excited to be here with you, Gemma. I'm Sophia Data, also a Southeast Asia program intern. We have lots of news in store for you this week. We'll cover aid after Myanmar's earthquake and Xi Jinping's visit to Southeast Asia.
We'll also cover upgrades to Cambodia's Ream naval base and Indonesian President Prabowo Subianto's Middle East tour. Today is Thursday, April 17th. This week, Greg is joined by Ken Mathis Lohatepanont to discuss politics in Thailand. Before that, let's start with our headlines. It's been almost 3 weeks since a magnitude 7.7 earthquake hit Myanmar on March 28th. The earthquake has proven to be the second most deadly in Myanmar's history, with the death toll reaching over 3,600 people, with an additional 36 people killed in neighbouring Thailand. Many more are still missing.
An additional 5.5 magnitude earthquake struck the small Burmese city of Maiktala on Sunday morning. While no casualties or injuries have been reported from this earthquake, the new tremor amid ongoing relief efforts has added stress to an already strained rescue operation. International aid organizations have warned that persistent aftershocks are making it more difficult to access rural areas and deliver essential supplies.
Beyond natural disasters, the suffering in Myanmar has been compounded by the ongoing civil war as military strikes continued in the weeks following the earthquake, killing at least 68 civilians and members of rebel forces. Various rebel groups announced a ceasefire on April 1st, but the military junta under Min Aung Hlaing has continued its bombing campaigns.
We've seen a significant response by the international community to the situation in Myanmar. The United Nations Special Envoy for Myanmar, Julie Bishop, made a trip to the country where she met with Junta Foreign Minister Tan Sui to discuss coordination between Myanmar and the UN on aid for people affected by the earthquake.
And then on Friday, April 11, the UN issued a pretty strong statement condemning the military junta's actions, stating that the military forces have carried out over 120 attacks instead of making sure that humanitarian assistance is getting to the people who need it.
That's right. And beyond assistance from the UN, other countries across the region are also sending disaster relief to Myanmar. Indonesia, Malaysia, Cambodia, Singapore, Thailand, Vietnam, Brunei, and the Philippines have all sent some form of humanitarian assistance supplies or relief teams.
It's really great to see these ASEAN countries coming together at a time of disaster. Additionally, the United States has pledged $7 million in shelter, food, and water, despite the recent cuts to foreign aid under the Trump administration.
And as all of this was unfolding, Min Aung Hlaing visited Bangkok for the BIMSTEC summit on April 4th, where he met with Thai Prime Minister Paetongtarn Shinawatra and Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi.
Yeah, so it's a pretty big deal for Min Aung Hlaing to be going overseas. It's rare for him to leave Myanmar. He's only made trips to Russia and China since seizing power in 2021. And it's important not to forget that there's also a warrant for his arrest by the International Criminal Court for crimes against humanity.
That's right. So there's a lot happening in Myanmar, and we'll continue to bring updates as things develop. In other regional news, Chinese President Xi Jinping is visiting Vietnam, Malaysia, and Cambodia this week, his first overseas trip of the year. The visit comes amid ongoing U.S. tariff negotiations, which have impacted Southeast Asian countries, especially those Xi is visiting this week. A key objective of Xi's trip is to position China as a reliable partner to these nations in the face of rising U.S. trade barriers.
Yeah, this is definitely an important diplomatic opportunity for Xi. In Vietnam, he's been received with full honours and signed over 45 bilateral agreements with Vietnamese leaders. These span everything from trade and infrastructure to digital cooperation and rare earth development. The message from Beijing is clear. China wants to solidify its position as Vietnam's top economic partner, especially as Hanoi navigates increased uncertainty with the United States.
And that uncertainty has only grown. Washington's decision to impose a 46% tariff on Vietnamese goods, now delayed for 90 days, came in spite of Hanoi's efforts to reduce its trade surplus and comply with U.S. demands. Xi is capitalizing on this unstable moment, offering economic incentives and deeper integration through China's Belt and Road Initiative. Indeed, even the U.S. President Donald Trump said on Monday that Xi's visit to Vietnam is an effort to figure out how to screw the U.S.
But it's not just about economics. Xi is also pushing for closer strategic alignment, proposing upgrades to the existing bilateral relationship and emphasizing shared party-to-party ties between the Chinese Communist Party and Vietnam's ruling Communist Party. Still, Hanoi is walking a tightrope. It values China's trade, but also remains wary of Beijing's assertiveness in the South China Sea.
Absolutely. Vietnam's goal is to avoid choosing sides. It is strengthening security ties with the US and partners like Japan while keeping its economic doors open to China. Xi's visit is part reassurance, part pressure, signaling that China remains a powerful, unavoidable player in the region.
As of recording on Tuesday, April 15th, Xi has completed his time in Vietnam and has landed in Kuala Lumpur for talks with Malaysian government officials. He will also visit Cambodia later in the week, where he is expected to be greeted by Prime Minister Hun Manet and former Prime Minister and Senate President Hun Sen.
The stops in both Malaysia and Cambodia are expected to echo similar themes: economic partnership, political alignment, and positioning China as a stable counterweight to what Beijing calls an unpredictable US trade agenda.
The timing of Xi's visit to Cambodia aligns perfectly with the opening of improved facilities at Ream Naval Base. 2 weeks ago, Cambodia unveiled a new pier built by China to accommodate larger ships at the base, including aircraft carriers. A new China-Cambodia Ream Naval Base Joint Support and Training Center was also opened on the same day.
Ream Naval Base has been highly controversial following allegations in 2019 that China and Cambodia had signed a secret agreement allowing Beijing exclusive access of the base. And then in 2020, Cambodia demolished US-built facilities at the base. Cambodia's government denied that this was to make way for Chinese contractors instead, but suspicion remains.
At the inauguration of the new pier, Prime Minister Hun Manet praised Xi for his government's help in building the expansion, but Hun Manet denies that Ream is exclusively a Chinese base, saying that warships from all friendly countries can visit the base and hold joint military exercises.
Well, a Japanese vessel is planned to visit Ream as the first foreign warship to make a port call at the base. So it does seem like Cambodia is trying to send a message that it is open to cooperation with countries other than China.
Yeah. Either way, this new Chinese-built facility at Ream goes to show that China and Cambodia are serious about their strategic relationship.
Turning to Indonesia now, President Prabowo Subianto has just wrapped up a week-long diplomatic tour of the Middle East, where he visited 5 countries, including the United Arab Emirates, Turkey, Egypt, Qatar, and Jordan.
That's a lot. So let's start with the UAE. In Abu Dhabi, Prabowo focused on deepening defense and investment ties. He met with the UAE President Mohammed bin Zayed Al Nahyan, and both leaders reaffirmed cooperation on energy, defense manufacturing, and infrastructure. The visit built on existing bilateral momentum, especially given the UAE's past support for Indonesia's new capital city project, Nusantara.
At his next stop in Turkey, the focus was strategic defense cooperation. Indonesia and Turkey have a long-standing partnership in military technology, co-producing drones and tanks. President Erdogan visited Jakarta in February this year, so this meeting was a continuation of those positive diplomatic relations. Prabowo's visit reinforced joint production efforts and may pave the way for expanded joint training and procurement.
And at his next stop in Cairo, Prabowo met with Egyptian President Abdul Fattah el-Sisi and discussed food security, Islamic finance, and educational exchanges. Indonesia and Egypt share a long history as leading voices in the Islamic world, and this visit emphasized South-South cooperation, especially in agriculture and trade.
Prabowo's visit to Qatar also made big headlines, with a $2 billion investment commitment that Qatar pledged to Indonesia's new sovereign wealth fund, Danantara. This was a major diplomatic and economic win. President Prabowo held a productive one-on-one with the Emir of Qatar, and the visit culminated in the signing of a memorandum of understanding to launch regular strategic dialogues between the two governments.
And finally, Prabowo's last stop was in Jordan. King Abdullah II personally greeted President Prabowo at Marca Military Airport with fighter jet escorts, a 21-gun salute, and the king even driving Prabowo to his hotel himself. It was a powerful show of diplomatic brotherhood and personal rapport as the two leaders went to the same military academy together in the United Kingdom. While no major agreements were announced, the tone of the visit suggests a renewed commitment to closer cooperation, possibly in counterterrorism and interfaith diplomacy. It's clear that this was an incredibly packed week of high-level diplomacy. These visits not only solidified Indonesia's presence in the Middle East, but also strengthened personal relationships that will likely pay off for years to come. A successful trip all around.
And those are the headlines. Did we miss anything you wanted to hear about? If so, please write us at searadio@csis.org or DM us on your favorite social media platform. Up next, Greg's conversation with Ken Mathis Lohatepanont. Please stay tuned.
Welcome back, folks. As always, I'm Greg Poling with CSIS. Unfortunately, flying solo today, Alina can't join us, but we've got a fantastic returning guest, Ken Lohatepanont, who's a doctoral candidate in the Department of Political Science at the University of Michigan. Ken joined us about 2 years ago, earlier in the tenure of the podcast, and he's back again to talk about Thai politics. Ken, thanks so much for coming back on.
Hi, Greg. So glad to be back here.
I think we had you on 2 years ago to talk about, messy coalition politics in the run up to the election. And here we are 2 years later, and things haven't gotten any less messy, as far as I can tell, in Bangkok. The Pheu Thai-led loose coalition is still in charge. Paetongtarn Shinawatra is prime minister, which was not the case last time we had you on. She just faced a no confidence motion in parliament, 2 weeks ago, at the time of recording, so probably 3 weeks ago for those listening, which she survived, but I take it that's not a great sign of the coalition's strengths. So maybe I can just start by asking you how you think the government is hanging together in Bangkok these days.
Right. So the current Pheu Thai coalition is certainly not a natural government of friends and allies. It was forged in the aftermath of the 2023 general election, which we discussed 2 years ago on this podcast. And during that election, of course, it had been won by the Progressive Move Forward Party, which has now, of course, been dissolved. In response to that election victory, the Pheu Thai party had formed an alliance instead with the previous conservative parties that had been a part of the Briut Janoshai coalition, the coup leader who had ruled between 2014 to 2023. And as I said before, this was an alliance of strange bedfellows, right? These are parties that have been in conflict with each other, in tension with each other, for the better half of the past 2 decades. And it's been very clear since then that there has been tensions between particularly the Pheu Thai party and the second biggest party in the coalition, the Phum Jai Thai party. The Phum Jai Thai party is an interesting party because it's never been the biggest party in parliament. It's never formed a government on its own, but it's been a key player in a succession of governments due to its always achieving a modest size in parliament. Currently, it's the second biggest party in the coalition right now. It's always been seen as more ideologically flexible, which allows it to join with different partners, both conservative and Pheu Thai in the past. But currently, we know that it has a lot of bargaining power, not just because of the number of MPs, but because last year when a new set of senators had been selected, it appeared that the Phum Jai Thai party had been able, through some arcane process of self-selection, which we can get to later if you want, had managed to elect many of its allies into the Senate. And so now Pheu Thai faces a government with what almost looks like an internal opposition of its own, where the Phum Jai Thai party acts as a veto player, both through its strength in the lower house and the upper house, in frustrating Pheu Thai policies it doesn't like.
When we talk about the difficult position that Pheu Thai finds itself in, on the one hand, it's got this coalition that consists of royalist and conservative and military-aligned parties who don't like Pheu Thai at all. They just hate the People's Party, formerly Move Forward Party, more. So there's a constant sort of Damocles dangling over the head of the party should the elites decide that it's actually not their strongest play to remain in this coalition. You've got Phum Jai Thai, led by Anutin, the DPM, seeming to play their own game, positioning themselves as the real power brokers. You've also got the awkwardness of Thaksin Shinawatra, of Prime Minister Paetongtarn's father, who was the bête noire of the elites for the last 2.5 decades. And I think everybody's understanding was that there was a gentleman's agreement reached, that he could return home from exile, Pheu Thai could stand in the elections, the Conservatives would support their leadership of the coalition if Thaksin would just take a quiet retirement.
Yes.
And yet he likes to make speeches. I think I just saw that he met with Prime Minister Modi, quote, as friends on the sidelines of a recent summit. He doesn't seem to be helping his daughter keep in power here.
Yes, I think, of course, we don't have any formal evidence that any sort of grand compromise exists between the Conservatives and Pheu Thai, right? So one of the funny dynamics of analyzing Thai politics right now is just the fact that a lot of what we're analyzing is based on guesswork, based on, trying to put these jigsaw puzzles together. But it's been very clear that Thaksin's treatment has been unusual. His very brief stay in prison, his extended ability to stay in hospital while serving his prison sentence. And then since he's been back out, as you say, he hasn't been shy at all about throwing his weight around. One of the most interesting quotes that I remember he gave was someone asked if he controls the Prime Minister, Paetongtarn Shinawatра's daughter. And he says, "I don't control her, I merely possess her as her father." Which, was a striking quote to give. And it was something that really indicates that he's not shy about throwing his weight around and vetoing his influence. Last year, he had a high-profile speech where he outlined, his vision and his policies for Thailand. It was something that many people felt was probably the duty of the Prime Minister to be giving this sort of speech, not Thaksin, who's supposedly retired. And he has been campaigning heavily in the local elections that just happened in February. And just this week, it was reported that he had made threats to coalition partners that if they would not support the Pheu Thai government's new casinos policy, which would legalize gambling in entertainment complexes in the country, he would eject these parties from the coalition. Thaksin later came out and said that he had made no such comments, but he still emphasized that he felt this was an important policy. So it's clear that he is the big driving force in the government's decision-making, it appears.
One of the, major questions here is whether or not Pheu Thai's time in leadership now is succeeding in burnishing its credentials, which had been badly undermined. Support had collapsed in some key strongholds in favor of Move Forward in 2023. And there was a bounce in polling in the first year or two of the coalition. Do we have a sense of the government's current popularity? How, if an election were held tomorrow, they would actually fare against the People's Party?
So this is an interesting question, because I think that if it had been a head-to-head between Paetongtarn Shinawatra, who's the Prime Minister, and Pita Limcharoenrat, who was previously the leader of the Move Forward Party, highly popular, seen as charismatic, and had won the election in 2023, I think that at that point, Pita had been gaining a very high polling lead between himself and the previous Prime Minister, Sethas Visin, who was of course removed last year by the Constitutional Court. Right now, as things stand, it's a little bit harder to tell how Pheu Thai would fare against the People's Party. The People's Party leadership is much less well known and recognizable to most ordinary voters. The leader of the party is Nattapong Rungpanyawut, who is a self-styled tech geek, was more behind the scenes, didn't really have a high profile. And his polling has improved, but it's still not where Pita was. So if I had to guess, I've done some surveys on this back in 2023, where I found that most people who voted for Pheu Thai viewed the conservative figures very unfavorably, and perhaps that alone would indicate that there would be big movement between Pheu Thai voters in 2023 towards the People's Party. And no polling has shown that the current government is very popular at all. But I do think that the People's Party will probably face a tougher challenge in trying to gain seats at Pheu Thai's expense compared to when they were still being led by Pita.
And when do we have to see another election?
If I recall correctly, since we had the last election in 2023, the next election will probably happen in about 2027.
So they have a couple more years.
Yes.
For the coalition to either succeed or fail before we head into what could be another dangerous period. If People's Party were to actually gain a plurality yet again and be blocked from government yet again. One of the other players here is Bangkok's Governor Chadchart, and I was impressed by a recent article of yours I read.
Thank you.
No problem. He had really taken folks by surprise with his huge win in the last, I think it was 2022 gubernatorial elections, where he was a kind of former close to the Pheu Thai party, had rebranded himself as an independent, really swept the city. And your article argues that his popularity was suffering, but may have received a bounce because of the tragedy of the recent earthquake, where he excelled where maybe national figures didn't in the public response. Can you pick apart that argument a little bit?
Yes. So let's recall that Governor Chadchart had won the Bangkok gubernatorial election in 2022 with about 50% of the vote, which was highly impressive given that he was running against a crowded field, including other high-profile candidates. And the fact that he had won half the vote indicated that regardless of what happened during his tenure, he was going to be able to put a tough fight for re-election, given the high mark that he served with. But recent opinion polling has indicated that his popularity has slipped. And there was a poll, I believe, late last year, which indicated that his popularity has slipped to about 40%. 40% of voters said they would vote for him again, which, again, perhaps would have been more than sufficient for him to defeat another crowded field, but did indicate that he was losing popularity. One reason that he had been suffering in the polls, most likely, is because of a perception that he had made a lot of promises and a lot of pledges during election, but there wasn't necessarily a lot to show for it, partly because Chathad had indicated that he wanted to focus on what he called the smaller issues that were impacting people's livelihoods, what he called the capillaries, right? Instead of focusing on just the main arteries of the capital, focusing on these overlooked issues. But as part of that, some people felt that he had a lack of visible achievements. The earthquake, which of course came as a surprise to most of us in Thailand because Bangkok's not known for earthquakes. I think that the fact that he was able to respond quickly and effectively and speak clearly during this emergency has really helped him. There's been a lot of commentators who said they haven't been satisfied with Chathad's performance in all aspects, but praising him for, having good communication and good systematic management. Meanwhile, his actions have contrasted with the role of the national government, which has been criticized. For example, a group of senators criticized the Pathanthan administration for still pushing the passage of the casino policy in parliament, despite the fact that that's not a priority right now, instead of focusing on the earthquake response.
All right, let's zoom out a little bit to the government's actual policies. We've been talking about the Mandarin coalition politics, but we haven't talked about what Pheu Thai is supposed to be doing. I mean, Pheu Thai has for 20 years been viewed, at least by the elites, as a populist political machine seeking to give away subsidies and the like to mainly rural farmers in exchange for votes. That is a playbook that, of course, the military then stole from them when they were in power and was even more populist than Pheu Thai ever was. So it's not surprising Pheu Thai comes back into power in 2023, and their big push is we're going to restart the economy by injecting some hot money into it via the digital wallet scheme. That was the big play. How's that going? Has it helped, or is the macroeconomic constraints on Thailand only getting worse?
So part of the problem for the 10,000 baht digital wallet policy, which I think works out to about $300, right? Probably. Part of the problem here is that the policy has been frustrated. There's been a lot of opposition from many groups and warnings from the Bank of Thailand, for example, about how this policy is not feasible economically or might not even be legal. And so Thaksin and Pheu Thai has had to scale down this policy, making it more targeted, for example, and delaying its implementation into phases. And so instead of I think Pheu Thai was calling it during the election a big economic hurricane that would help lift up the Thai economy, what we got instead was this more delayed and smaller rollout. So far, I don't know if it's had, a significant impact yet on consumption and on the economy. Thai growth remains, pretty anemic. And, given the geopolitical situation, economic forecasts probably are not going to look any rosier for Thailand anytime soon. In response to this, Prime Minister Pathanthan at one point, called out the Bank of Thailand, actually, and said that they were frustrating Thailand's development, which I don't think helps with investor confidence at all. They did try to select a new chairman of the board for the Bank of Thailand that was drawn from a Pheu Thai ally, but then that move was blocked within the bureaucracy. And so it seems like Pheu Thai is being quite hamstrung by, their lack of ability to move freely, policy-wise.
The two biggest components of the Thai economy are manufacturing, of which the most important part traditionally has been the auto sector, and tourism. And both are getting beaten pretty badly in recent years. Of course, COVID didn't help, but already Thailand was being undercut by regional competitors on the manufacturing side. And then what seems to have been a bit of accidental self-sabotage here with this big tax incentive or subsidy incentive regime offered to Chinese EV manufacturers, allowing them to export at very low cost large numbers of Chinese EVs into Thailand with a promise that they would then begin manufacturing in Thailand. And what's happened is a flood of EVs, and then the Chinese companies said, actually, never mind, we're going to need a delay before we can open any factories. While the traditional manufacturing base in Thailand, the Japanese automakers and the auto part suppliers that supply them are freaking out because, nobody needs those parts for Chinese EVs. Mm-hmm. Has this been hurting Pheu Thai? Do they have an answer to this problem?
I'm not sure that, in general, industrial policy or manufacturing has really been something that Pheu Thai has been talking much about publicly at all. There was a much heavier focus, I think, during the Brigitte administration on, the Eastern Economic Corridor, on industrial strategy, on implementing strategies that would help improve what they call the S-curve industries, right? Right now, I feel like there's been a relative neglect of this discussion in public. So I'm not sure what's going on in private. And in terms of the discussion about EVs and about Japanese autos and Chinese imports coming in, I don't think that's been a big focus in public either. I do think that it is something, of course, that's highly important, especially given the geopolitical situation right now. And it would probably be prudent for Pheu Thai to say more. But then again, perhaps this is not something that voters are focused on and not something that will help win the Pheu Thai the next election. Hence the relative lack of discussion.
It won't help unless more and more factory workers are thrown out of their jobs because their Japanese conglomerates decide to shut down manufacturing in Thailand, which several of the Japanese majors are already doing. And then on the tourism side, the pandemic battered Thailand's tourism industry as it did everywhere on Earth. And then there was the brief recovery. But then Chinese tourism, which has been such a big driver, has really dried up because of fears about scam centers. And that seems to have become the cause celeb, from what I can tell, in Thailand, and certainly was the focus of Paetongtarn's recent visit to China. Can you pick apart a little bit how this issue has taken over Thai-Chinese relations of late?
Well, something that was very interesting to happen earlier this year was that China's Vice Minister of Public Security, Liu Zhongyi, made a visit to Thailand. And during this trip, he did the usual diplomatic duties of meeting with leading officials, like cabinet ministers, but then he also made a trip to the Myanmar-Thailand border. And my understanding is that this type of field visit by a top Chinese official independently to a border area, such a field visit was not necessarily common. And it appeared that this action had been taken to put pressure in Thailand to take stronger action on the scam centers that were proliferating on the Myanmar border. These scam centers, of course, are mostly run by Chinese nationals and were preying on Chinese nationals visiting Thailand, and collaboration between Thailand and Myanmar would have been needed to help reduce their proliferation. Immediately after the visit, of course, the Thai government suspended the supply of electricity to several hotspots to be seen as taking action. And then when Paetongtarn visited China, President Xi Jinping did say that he appreciated Thailand's measures to crack down on the gambling and the telecom fraud. But at this point, I think that it's still unclear what other actions that the Thai government is going to be willing to take to crack down on the scam centers. And it's also not clear what other measures that the Thai government can take to make Chinese tourists feel safe again in Thailand. One thing that the Prime Minister did do was she released an AI-edited video of herself speaking in Chinese to try to calm down the fears of Chinese tourists. I'm not sure whether or not using an AI-edited video was the best way to calm down people, but that's something they've been doing. And of course, we have seen recently that the Paetongtarn government invited the Myanmar junta leader, Min Aung Hlaing, to come to Bangkok this week. Whether or not that is an opening to try to get further collaboration from Myanmar to collaborate with cracking out of scam centers, I guess, remain to be seen.
All right, so you've predicted where I wanted to end the conversation, which is Myanmar. Thailand is the most important player among the Southeast Asian countries when it comes to the crisis in Myanmar, perhaps second in leverage to China, at least on some issues, but has had, it seems, a very scratchy relationship with the other members of ASEAN when it comes to this. Increasingly, it looks like the Thai government has grown frustrated with ASEAN's approach and the ASEAN 5-point consensus and has decided effectively that it should be Thailand that takes the lead in helping to, reconcile or advance the agenda when it comes to engagement with ASEAN. And that has led to a series of meetings in Bangkok with other of Myanmar's neighbors, not attended by some members of ASEAN in kind of a clear sign of condemnation with this engagement with the junta. And then most recently, as you indicated, junta leader Min Aung Hlaing being invited to the BIMSTEC, Bangladesh, India, Myanmar. I never remember what this stands for.
There's Bhutan as well, I think.
There's a Thailand Economic Corridor. There you go, EC. Anyway, Min Aung Hlaing getting to come to Bangkok and be seen at the side of Modi and Paetongtarn and other leaders as a normal head of state, something that had been denied him consistently for the last 4 years. What does this say about Thailand's approach? Is Bangkok embracing the junta as the least bad option because they need to work on scam centers and other issues? Or am I being too harsh about the invitation of Min Aung Hlaing to Bangkok?
In some ways, the Thai government probably sees this engagement as pragmatic, right? They know that Thailand is dependent on Myanmar for a variety of needs, such as energy, collaboration on border security. Thailand has always had concerns about the armed groups on the border. But of course, there has been a lot of controversy in Thailand about whether or not, take into consideration these needs and these concerns. The right approach is then to legitimize the junta leader, despite the approach that has been taken regionally by ASEAN. And the invitation, of course, as you mentioned, did give something to Min Aung Hlaing that he's been craving, international legitimacy. I don't recall if he's ever been invited to an international summit in this way. I believe not. But there has been protests in Thailand against this move. Of course, it's very controversial, to say the least.
He's made several trips to Russia, visited China, and I think in the early days after the coup, he participated in the ASEAN meeting to agree to the 5-point consensus. But I don't believe he's been invited to an international summit outside of Russia or China since then. Though apologies to listeners if I missed one. And yet Thailand still plays kind of a double game here. It does provide sanctuary from which particularly the K2 part of the K2C, the Karen and Karenni armed actors operate, and much of the national unity government. Is this Thailand trying to spread its bets so that if the junta actually does lose in some fashion, it still has avenues for engagement with the EROs that will form a future federal government?
Well, I wouldn't be surprised if that were the case. Thailand's mode of operation for its foreign policy has always been bamboo bending in the wind, right? Trying to play two sides, trying to place itself strategically to ensure maximum benefit, whatever the outcome. So if Thailand is trying to hedge its bets here, I think it would fit perfectly well in Thailand's traditional foreign policy.
All right, Ken. Well, we've covered a lot of ground, domestic and international. Why don't we leave it there? I suspect that we'll have more opportunity to talk about Thai politics and the vulnerable position of the Thai government in the future. But for now, thanks so much for joining me. I am sorry again, dear listeners, that Alina wasn't here, but I'm sure she'll be back in 2 weeks. And thank all of you for listening to this episode of Southeast Asia Radio.
Thank you so much, Greg.
Thanks again for joining us for this episode of Southeast Asia Radio. Feel free to write us with any comments, questions, or feedback at searadio@csis.org, and we'll be sure to answer any burning questions you may have.
Do us a favor and subscribe and give us a rating on Apple Podcasts or Spotify or whatever streaming platform you listen to us on. Tell your friends about us.
Marla Hiller is our producer, and our interns are us, Sophia Data and Gemma King. Our co-host today was Greg Poling. My name is Sophia Data.
And I'm Gemma King.
And we'll see you in 2 weeks for another episode of Southeast Asia Radio.